What if the reason you have not given up yet is because your future self is already calling you forward? Not loudly, not dramatically, not with a voice from the sky, but through a pressure inside your chest that refuses to let you accept this life as the final version of your story. You may be in a season where nothing looks certain anymore. The plan you trusted may have fallen apart. The person you thought you were may no longer feel strong enough to carry the weight of your days. The dream that once gave you direction may now feel distant, almost unreal. You wake up, move through the same rooms, answer the same demands, carry the same private questions, but something inside you knows this cannot be the ending. That knowing matters. There are moments in life when logic says you should stop. There are moments when your past gives you every reason to believe nothing will change. You have tried before. You have hoped before. You have rebuilt before. You have watched doors close after giving everything you had. So by normal reasoning, giving up would almost make sense. But you do not give up. You may slow down. You may break down. You may sit in silence longer than you admit. You may lose the energy to explain yourself to people who only see the surface. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion, there is still a small current moving through you. That current is not random. It is the part of you that has not agreed to disappear. It is the part of you that senses a future before your circumstances can prove it. Most people believe they are only shaped by what happened behind them, their childhoods, their mistakes, their losses, their disappointments, their missed chances, their old patterns. They move through life as if the past is the only force with gravity. But the past is not the only thing that can pull on a human being. A possible future can pull too. You have felt this before. You may not have called it that. You may have called it intuition. You may have called it restlessness. You may have called it a strange feeling that you are meant for something more. You may have felt it after a conversation, after a dream, after hearing one sentence at the right time, or after sitting alone and realizing that your current life no longer fits the person you are becoming. That feeling is easy to dismiss. The mind says, be realistic. The fear says, stay where it is familiar. The old identity says, do not risk another disappointment. But the deeper self does not speak in fear. It speaks through recognition. It does not always tell you exactly where to go. It simply tells you that you cannot remain where you are. This is where the idea becomes powerful. Maybe you are not only being pushed by pain. Maybe you are being pulled by possibility. Maybe the crisis you are facing is not just a punishment, not just bad timing, not just another chapter of struggle. Maybe it is the moment when the old version of your life has lost its authority and a future version of you has begun to send a signal backward through your choices, your discomfort, your longing, and your refusal to settle. This does not mean everything is mystical in a careless way. It does not mean you should ignore reality. It does not mean some future version of you will solve your problems without action. It means something more grounded and more serious. There may be a version of you that already exists as a possibility. Stronger, clearer, more honest, less available for the same pain, less willing to shrink, less willing to repeat the same emotional prison. And even before you fully become that person, you may begin to feel the pull of that identity. That is why some endings feel different. Some losses do not only take something away, they remove the illusion that you could continue living half awake. Some breakdowns do not only break your confidence, they break your loyalty to a life that was too small for your soul. Some moments of emptiness do not mean you are finished. They mean the old noise has gone quiet enough for you to hear a new signal. And that signal may not come as certainty. It may come as a quiet refusal. I cannot keep living like this. I cannot keep betraying what I know. I cannot keep choosing comfort over truth. I cannot keep pretending the life that drains me is the life meant for me. That refusal is sacred because it is the first language of change. Before a person rebuilds their life, something inside them must stop agreeing with the old one. Before the outer world changes, the inner permission changes first. You begin to feel less at home in your old excuses. You begin to notice the cost of staying the same. You begin to question the identity you once defended. You begin to sense that the crisis is not only asking, why did this happen to me? It is asking, who am I being asked to become now? That question is the doorway, because you are not just a collection of wounds. You are not just the result of what failed. You are not just the person other people misunderstood, disappointed, abandoned, or underestimated. You are also the person being called forward by a future that still has your name on it. And maybe the reason you are still here, still listening, still searching, still trying to understand the meaning of this season is because some part of you already knows the truth. Your life is not finished. This crisis is not the final identity. The signal is already moving through you, not from outside. From the version of you that survived this moment, grew from it, and is now reaching back through time with one clear message. Do not stop here. What if the reason you have not given up yet is because your future self is already calling you forward? Retrocausality begins with a strange possibility. What if time is not as simple as the mind wants it to be? Most of us were taught to imagine time as a straight road. The past is behind you, the present is under your feet. The future is somewhere ahead, waiting to arrive. Cause comes first, effect comes later. A choice is made, then a result appears. That is the ordinary view. It is useful. It helps us live. But at the edge of quantum physics, things become less comfortable. In some interpretations of quantum theory, time does not behave like a simple one-way arrow. Certain ideas suggest that what happens later may be connected to what is happening now in ways that challenge common sense. This is where the word retrocausality appears. Retrocausality does not mean your future is magically controlling everything. It does not mean destiny has already written every detail of your life. It does not give anyone permission to abandon responsibility. It means something more subtle. It points to the possibility that the relationship between past, present, and future may be deeper than our everyday experience can easily explain. In some quantum discussions, the final outcome of an event may seem linked to the earlier state of that event. The future and the present are not always treated as completely separate strangers. That is a difficult idea, but as a metaphor for human life, it becomes powerful. Because you have already experienced moments where a future version of you seemed to influence the person you were becoming. You made a decision without having all the evidence. You left a situation before you could fully explain why. You stopped trusting a path that once looked safe. You felt drawn toward a book, a place, a person, a question, a discipline, a practice, or a new identity before you knew what it would become. At the time, it may have looked irrational, but years later, you look back and saw the pattern. You realized that something in you already knew, not because you had proof, not because the past gave you a clear instruction, but because a future version of you was beginning to form, and that future needed you to make one uncomfortable choice in the present. This is the strange intelligence of transformation. The person you are becoming often sends signals before they fully arrive. At first, those signals do not sound like certainty. They sound like discomfort. They sound like restlessness. They sound like a quiet sentence that repeats inside you. This is not it. There is more than this. I cannot keep living from this version of myself. That inner message may not be loud, but it is persistent. It may visit you during ordinary moments, while driving alone, while lying awake at night, while watching your life from the outside and wondering how so much time passed, while sitting across from people who know your habits but no longer know your soul. You begin to feel a distance between who you have been and who you are being asked to become. That distance is not always depression. It is not always failure. Sometimes it is the pressure of a future identity pressing against the walls of an old life. This is why crisis can feel so confusing. One part of you wants relief. Another part of you wants rebirth. One part wants everything to return to normal. Another part knows that normal was the cage. This tension is where the signal becomes strongest. The future does not always call you through comfort. Sometimes it calls you through the pain of no longer being able to lie to yourself. It calls you through the strange exhaustion of repeating the same lesson. It calls you through the moment when success without meaning begins to feel empty. It calls you through the quiet grief of realizing that the life you built may not be the life that can carry your next level of consciousness. That is not weakness. That is information. A person at midlife or later often understands this better than anyone. By then, you have lived long enough to know that the outer world can look stable while the inner world is collapsing. You can have responsibilities, history, family, reputation, bills, routines, and still feel a hidden question. rising from the center of your life. Is this who I came here to be? That question is not random. It may be the future trying to enter the present, not as a fantasy, not as an escape, but as a demand for alignment. The future self does not need you to become perfect. It needs you to become honest. Honest about what drains you, honest about what you keep postponing, honest about the fear you call practicality, honest about the dream you buried because disappointment taught you to lower your expectations. When that honesty begins, time changes. The past no longer feels like a prison. The present no longer feels like a dead end. The future no longer feels like a distant place. It becomes a living pressure inside your choices. This is the deeper message of retrocausality as a spiritual lens. You are not only walking toward the future. In some mysterious way, the future may also be reaching toward you. It may be touching your present through intuition, discomfort, longing, repeated signs, and sudden clarity. It may be asking you to notice what no longer fits. It may be asking you to stop calling your fear wisdom. It may be asking you to make one choice that your old self would avoid, but your future self requires. So when you feel that quiet pull, do not dismiss it too quickly. Not every feeling is guidance. Not every coincidence is a command. But some signals deserve your attention, because the future is not always something you arrive at after enough time passes. Sometimes the future begins as a whisper in the present, and sometimes that whisper is the most honest thing you have heard in years. A crisis does not always mean your life is falling apart. Sometimes it means the old timeline can no longer hold you. That does not make the pain easy. It does not make the loss beautiful. It does not turn confusion into poetry. When a person is in the middle of a real crisis, it can feel brutal. You may lose a job that once gave you identity. You may lose a relationship that held your future together in your mind. You may lose direction after years of doing what you thought was responsible. You may lose faith in people, in timing, in your own judgment, or even in the version of yourself you worked so hard to become. And when that happens, the mind immediately asks the wrong question. Why is everything being taken from me? But a deeper question may be trying to rise. What part of my life can no longer come with me? That question is not comfortable, because most people do not leave old versions of themselves willingly. They leave them when staying becomes too painful. They change when the familiar stops protecting them. They awaken when the life they built around survival begins to suffocate the part of them that still wants meaning. This is why crisis often arrives like a collapse. But beneath the collapse, something else may be happening. A separation. You are being separated from a version of yourself that learned how to survive but forgot how to live. You are being separated from an identity that was built around approval, fear, responsibility, old wounds, and quiet self-betrayal. You are being separated from a timeline where you keep repeating the same emotional lesson, meeting the same kind of disappointment, choosing the same kind of safety and calling it maturity. That separation can feel like destruction because your old self does not leave peacefully. It argues. It panics. It reminds you of your age. It reminds you of your obligations. It reminds you of every time you tried and failed. It tells you that it is too late to rebuild, too risky to change, too embarrassing to begin again, too painful to hope after so many years of disappointment. But the voice of fear is not always the voice of truth. Sometimes it is only the voice of a timeline that knows it is ending. For many people between 35 and 65, this moment carries a very specific weight. You are no longer standing at the beginning of life pretending time is unlimited. You have lived enough years to see the cost of your choices. You have buried certain dreams. You have adapted to certain disappointments. You have smiled through things you never fully healed from. You have carried responsibilities that forced you to be strong before you had time to understand your own pain. So when the crisis comes, it does not feel like a small inconvenience. It feels like a verdict. It feels like life is asking you to look at everything you avoided. The marriage that became a performance. The career that became a cage. The dream that was postponed until it started to feel foolish. The body that has been carrying stress for years. The silence you kept to keep the peace. The version of you that everyone depended on, even while you were disappearing inside. This is why the crisis hurts. It is not only taking away what you had. It is exposing what you tolerated. It is showing you where your energy has been leaking. It It is revealing which parts of your identity were never truly yours. And still, this is not the same as being destroyed. Destruction leaves nothing but emptiness. Transformation creates space. At first, the two can look almost identical. You may feel empty because the old meaning is gone. You may feel lost because the old map no longer works. You may feel weak because the old armor has cracked. You may feel alone because the people who understood your former life may not understand the person you are becoming. But emptiness is not always the absence of life. Sometimes it is the clearing before a new reality has enough room to enter. There is a strange moment in every deep transformation when the old self has already lost its power, but the new self has not yet taken shape. This is the most dangerous and sacred part of the process. Because in that space, you may think nothing is happening, but something is happening. Your attachment to the old reality is weakening. The emotional charge around old patterns is beginning to break. The identity that once controlled your choices is losing authority. You are no longer able to believe the same excuses with the same innocence. You are no longer able to betray yourself without feeling the cost immediately. You are no longer able to call stagnation stability. That is not failure. That is the fracture point. The old timeline begins to crack when your soul can no longer participate in its own shrinking. This is why some crises carry a strange hidden clarity. Even when you are afraid, a part of you knows you cannot go back. Even when you miss what was familiar, you know it was not fully honest. Even when the future is uncertain, the past is no longer a home. That knowing is painful, but it is clean. It cuts through illusion. It tells you that the crisis is not only happening to you, it is happening through you. It is forcing a truth to the surface that comfort kept buried. You are not being asked to pretend this does not hurt. You are not being asked to smile while your life rearranges itself. You are not being asked to call every loss a blessing before you have had time to grieve. But you are being asked to see the difference between an ending and a breaking open. An ending closes the story. A breaking open reveals that the story was never finished. And maybe this is the message your future self is sending through the pressure of this moment. You are not being destroyed. You are being removed from a version of reality that can no longer carry your becoming. The job, the relationship, the identity, the belief, the routine, the old dream, the old fear, they may have served a purpose. They may have brought you this far, but not everything that brought you here is allowed to take you further. Some timelines must break because they were built around the person you had to be, not the person you are here to become. So if life feels like it is pulling pieces away from you, pause before you decide that everything is lost. Something deeper may be happening. The old structure may be falling because it was never meant to be your final home. And the part of you that can feel the pain of that collapse may also be the part of you strong enough to step into what comes after it. Not every sign is a miracle. Not every coincidence is a message. Not every feeling is guidance. But some signals deserve your attention because they keep returning even after you try to ignore them. When a future version of you begins pulling you forward, it rarely appears as a clear instruction. It does not arrive as a perfect map. It does not tell you every step, every date, every outcome. It usually begins as pressure, repetition, discomfort, a quiet pattern that keeps breaking through the noise of your normal life. The first sign is that you feel drawn toward a new direction without having a perfect reason. You may not understand why a certain idea keeps returning to you. A new career, a new place, a new practice, a new way of living, a new relationship with your body, your faith, your work, your money, your voice, your purpose. At first, it may seem unrealistic. You may tell yourself it is too late. You may say you are too old to start again. You may believe your responsibilities have already decided the shape of your future, but the pull does not leave. It keeps showing up. You hear a conversation and it points there. You read a sentence and it points there. You sit alone in silence and it points there. This does not mean you should abandon your life recklessly. It means something in you is asking to be examined honestly. A future self may not begin by giving you certainty. It may begin by disturbing your attachment to the life you thought you had to accept. The second sign is that your old life starts to feel strangely uncomfortable. Not necessarily terrible, not always dramatic, just too small. The routines that once helped you feel safe begin to feel heavy. The conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. The roles you once performed without question begin to feel like clothing that no longer fits. This can be confusing because nothing obvious may be wrong. You may still have the same home, the same work, the same people, the same schedule. On the outside, life may look stable, but inside, there is friction, a quiet resistance, a sense that the version of you who built this life is not the same version of you who must now live inside it. That discomfort is easy to misread. Some people call it boredom. Some call it aging. Some call it ingratitude. But sometimes it is none of those things. Sometimes discomfort is the soul refusing to remain loyal to an outdated identity. The third sign is repeated coincidence, a number that keeps appearing, a phrase that follows you for weeks, a person who arrives at the exact moment you were questioning something, an opportunity that appears after you finally admit a truth to yourself, a book, a message, a conversation, a memory, all circling the same theme. Again, not every pattern is sacred. The mind can invent meaning when it is desperate for control. But when a pattern comes with clarity, not panic, you should pay attention. There is a difference between chasing signs and recognizing alignment. Chasing signs makes you anxious. You become dependent on the outside world to tell you what to do. Recognizing alignment makes you quiet. You feel something settle in the body, as if life has placed a marker on the path and asked you to look more closely. The fourth sign is that you begin to dream of another life. This may happen while sleeping, but it can also happen while awake. You see yourself in a different state, calmer, stronger, freer, more truthful. You imagine a life where your nervous system is not always bracing for impact. You see yourself speaking with more confidence, walking away from what drains you, creating something meaningful, loving without losing yourself, working without betraying your health, living without constantly apologizing for your existence. These inner images are not always fantasy. Sometimes they are rehearsal. The mind often sees a new identity before the body knows how to live it. The image comes first, the feeling comes next, the decision follows. Then the outer world begins to change because your inner reference point has shifted. This is why you must be careful with the images you repeatedly hold. Some people spend years rehearsing disaster, then wonder why courage feels impossible. Others begin to rehearse a freer self, and slowly their choices become less obedient to fear. The fifth sign is that you lose interest in what once defined you. This one can feel frightening. You may no longer want the approval you used to chase. You may no longer feel impressed by the status you once desired. You may no longer find comfort in distractions that used to numb you. You may no longer feel connected to certain ambitions, environments, or versions of success. This does not mean you are becoming lazy. It may mean your values are changing. A younger version of you may have needed recognition. A wounded version may have needed control. A fearful version may have needed certainty. A lonely version may have needed attention from the wrong people. A survival version may have needed to prove that you are enough. But the future self may not need the same things. The future self may want peace more than performance, truth more than approval, depth more than noise, freedom more than image, meaning more than momentum. When these old attachments begin to lose their grip, do not rush to fill the emptiness. Let it speak. Let it show you what no longer has authority over your life. Because a signal from the future is not always a flash of light. Sometimes it is the quiet death of an old desire. Sometimes it is the sudden inability to keep lying to yourself. Sometimes it is the strange calm that comes after you finally admit, this is not where I belong anymore. And that is the point. You do not need to treat every sign as proof. You do not need to turn your life into superstition. You do not need to believe that every number, every dream, every coincidence is a command from the universe. But you do need to become honest enough to notice what keeps repeating. Because repetition is how the deeper self gets your attention. If the same discomfort keeps returning, listen. If the same longing keeps rising, listen. If the same new direction keeps calling, listen. If the same old life keeps draining you, listen. Not because everything is magical, but because something in you may already know what your conscious mind is still afraid to admit. The future does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it enters through small signals. Pull, a pattern, a dream, a loss of interest, a quiet refusal. And if you are willing to listen carefully, you may realize that these signals are not trying to confuse you. They are trying to bring you back into alignment with the person you were never too late to become. Fear is loud. That is why it is so easy to mistake fear for guidance. When you are under pressure, your inner world becomes crowded. Old memories speak. Old wounds speak. Old failures speak. The nervous system searches for danger before it searches for truth. And when fear becomes the main frequency inside you, almost every signal is filtered through survival. You do not hear possibility. You hear warning. You do not hear intuition. You hear protection. You do not hear the future. You hear the past trying to repeat itself. This is why emotional frequency matters. Not because you must stay positive every second. Not because sadness is low and happiness is high in some shallow way. Not because the universe punishes you for having difficult emotions. That kind of thinking is not wisdom. It only makes wounded people feel guilty for being human. Your vibration is not about pretending. It is not about smiling through grief. It is not about forcing hope while your body is still carrying pain. Your vibration is the condition of your inner receiver. If your inner world is chaotic, desperate, panicked, and constantly bracing for impact, you will interpret almost everything through the language of threat. You will see delay as rejection. You will see silence as abandonment. You will see uncertainty as danger. You will see change as proof that something is going wrong. But when your inner state becomes more stable, something changes. You do not suddenly have every answer. You do not become fearless. You do not stop feeling pain, but you begin to hear more clearly. A calmer state allows you to separate panic from truth. A more honest state allows you to recognize what you actually want instead of what fear told you to settle for. A clearer state allows you to notice the signal from your future self without twisting it into anxiety. This is where many people misunderstand the law of attraction. They think it means if I think good thoughts, good things must happen. But real transformation is more demanding than that. It asks for alignment. Your thoughts, emotions, choices, and identity must begin moving in the same direction. If you say you want a new life but keep feeding the emotional pattern of the old one, the old reality will still feel familiar. If you ask for peace but keep choosing chaos because chaos feels known, your nervous system will keep calling the cage a home. The future self does not speak clearly through emotional disorder. It speaks through presence. It speaks when you are willing to pause before reacting. It speaks when you stop using fear as your only advisor. It speaks when you admit the truth without immediately trying to escape it. Fear asks, what if I fail? Your future self asks, who must I become in order to move forward? Fear asks, what if they judge me? Your future self asks, how long will I keep living for people who cannot carry my calling? Fear asks, what if it is too late? Your future self asks, what can still be rebuilt with the time I have now? Fear asks, how can I avoid pain? Your future self asks, what pain is necessary for my freedom? These are very different questions. And the question you live inside becomes the reality you keep choosing. If your dominant question is always about avoiding loss, your life will shrink around protection. You will choose the familiar even when it drains you. You will keep doors closed because an old wound taught you that safety matters more than meaning. But if your dominant question becomes, what is life trying to make possible through me now? Your perception changes. You begin to see options where you once saw only threats. You begin to feel strength under the grief. You begin to recognize that the same crisis can either keep you trapped in the past or open you toward the future. The difference is not the event. The difference is the frequency from which you meet the event. A person living in fear sees a closed door and says, this is proof that nothing works for me. A person becoming aligned sees the same closed door and asks, what direction is no longer meant for me? A person living in fear feels discomfort and says, something is wrong. A person becoming aligned feels discomfort and asks, what part of me is outgrowing this place? A person living in fear feels silence and says, I have been abandoned. A person becoming aligned feels silence and asks, what noise is finally left so I can hear myself again? This is not denial. This is maturity. You are not pretending the pain is not real. You are refusing to let pain become the only interpreter of your life. That is the practical meaning of raising your vibration. It means becoming stable enough to stop obeying every emotional storm. It means becoming honest enough to stop calling fear intuition. It means becoming present enough to recognize the difference between a warning from your nervous system and guidance from your deeper self. Fear usually rushes. Intuition usually steadies. Fear contracts the body. Intuition may challenge you, but it does not humiliate you. Fear repeats old stories. Intuition opens a clean possibility. Fear says, protect the identity you already know. The future self says, become the person this moment is asking for. You do not need to be in a high vibration every day. That is not real life. There will be days when you feel tired, days when grief returns, days when doubt is strong, days when the old timeline feels familiar again. The goal is not perfection. The goal is recovery. Can you return to clarity after fear rises? Can you pause before reacting from the wound? Can you breathe long enough to ask a better question? Can you choose one action that belongs to your future instead of your past? That is how the signal becomes easier to hear, not because you escape your humanity, but because you stop letting panic drive your destiny. Your future self may already be sending the signal, but to receive it, you do not need to become endlessly positive. You need to become still enough, truthful enough, and steady enough to know when fear is speaking and when your future is calling. The future does not give you a full map, because a full map would steal the one thing your soul came here to build: choice. If every answer arrived clearly, if every step was explained in advance, if every loss came with a perfect reason, if every risk came with proof that it would work, you would not become wiser. You would only become obedient. And your future self is not trying to turn you into a puppet. It is trying to call you into participation. This is why the signal is often subtle. It does not usually arrive as a command. It arrives as a pull. It arrives as a quiet discomfort you can no longer ignore. It arrives as a repeated thought that keeps returning after the noise fades. It arrives as a small opportunity that looks ordinary on the outside but feels strangely important on the inside. Most people miss the signal because they are waiting for certainty. They want the universe to speak in final answers. They want the future to say, leave now, stay here, trust this person, take this path, start this work, rebuild your life this exact way. But life rarely gives that kind of clarity at the beginning. Clarity usually comes after movement. You take one honest step, then the next part becomes visible. You tell the truth once, then a new layer opens. You leave one false agreement, then your energy returns. You stop feeding one old pattern, then your perception sharpens. The path is not revealed to the person who only waits. It is revealed to the person who begins. That is difficult because the old self wants guarantees. The old self wants safety before surrender. The old self wants proof before courage. The old self says, show me the entire road, then I will walk. But the future self speaks differently. It says, take the step that belongs to the person you are becoming, then the road will answer. This is not blind faith. This is inner responsibility. Your future does not remove the need for decision. It deepens it. You still have to choose. You still have to act. You still have to make mistakes. You still have to correct yourself. You still have to learn where fear was lying, where pride was hiding, where comfort was costing too much, where the old story was pretending to be wisdom. A clear answer would feel easier, but it would not transform you. Transformation requires contact with uncertainty. It requires a moment where you cannot outsource your life to a sign. It requires you to stand in the unknown and ask, what choice would be most honest if I stopped begging fear for permission? That is why the future whispers. It respects your freedom. It does not force the door open. It places pressure on the handle. It does not drag you from your old life. It makes the old life harder to believe in. It does not give you a script. It gives you a repeated feeling that says, pay attention here. The signal may appear as restlessness, not the shallow kind that always wants distraction, but the deeper kind that tells you your life has become too small for your truth. The signal may appear as repetition. The same idea, the same question, the same name, the same opportunity, the same subject appearing again and again until you finally stop calling it random. The signal may appear as irritation. You may feel irritated by things you used to tolerate, not because you are becoming bitter, but because your inner standard is changing. The signal may appear as grief. You may suddenly feel sorrow for the years you spent abandoning yourself. That grief is not there to punish you. It is there to bring back the parts of you that were left behind. The signal may appear as a small door, a conversation, a class, a message, a book, a person, a chance to speak, a chance to leave, a chance to begin something quietly before the world understands it. Small doors are easy to dismiss because they do not look like destiny, but most new timelines begin in ordinary moments. A decision no one claps for, a truth no one sees, a boundary no one celebrates, a morning where you choose not to return to the same emotional prison. That is how the future begins to enter. Not through spectacle, through alignment. Many people remain stuck because they demand a sign strong enough to remove all doubt. But a sign that removes all doubt also removes the need for trust. And without trust, the deeper self never grows. You are not meant to know everything before you move. You are meant to become the kind of person who can move with enough truth to discover what comes after the first step. This is why silence matters. A noisy life cannot hear subtle guidance. If you are constantly reacting, constantly scrolling, constantly explaining, constantly defending the old identity, the whisper has no place to land. The future self may be speaking, but the present self is too crowded to receive it. Stillness does not mean doing nothing. Stillness means you stop arguing with what you already know. You stop asking the same question, hoping fear will give you a softer answer. You stop confusing delay with wisdom. You stop demanding that the entire staircase appear before you lift your foot. Then the signal becomes clearer, not because the universe suddenly shouts, but because you finally become quiet enough to notice what has been speaking beneath the noise. Your future self may not give you a perfect answer today. It may only give you a pull toward one honest action. Make the call. Close the door. Begin the work. Tell the truth. Rest your body. Stop returning to what breaks you. Choose the path that makes you more real. That may be all you receive at first, but one honest action can become a bridge. One bridge can become a new direction. One new direction can become an entirely different life. The future does not need to yell at you. It only needs you to stop worshipping the noise. Because the signal has never been absent. It has simply been quiet. And only the part of you willing to become still will be able to hear where it is calling you next. You do not need to change your entire life in one day. That belief is one of the reasons people stay frozen. They think transformation must arrive as a dramatic decision. Sell everything, leave everything, become someone completely new by Monday morning. But real alignment rarely begins with a performance. It begins with a signal, one clear signal from you to your future. I am listening. I am willing. I am no longer fully loyal to the old timeline. That is enough to begin. The first step is simple but not easy. Ask yourself, what is my future self asking me to leave behind? Do not rush the answer. Do not make it spiritual too quickly. Make it honest. Maybe your future self is asking you to leave behind a pattern of saying yes when your body is begging you to say no. Maybe it is asking you to leave behind the old habit of waiting for permission. Maybe it is asking you to leave behind the belief that your best years are behind you. Maybe it is asking you to leave behind the need to be understood by people who benefit from your silence. Sometimes what you must leave is not a person. Sometimes it is an identity. The identity of the one who always endures, the one who always delays their own life, the one who carries everyone but never asks to be carried, the one who calls exhaustion responsibility, the one who has become so used to surviving that peace feels suspicious. Write the question down, then let the truth rise without forcing it. The second step is to look back at the last 30 days, not the last 30 years, not your entire life story, just the last 30 days. Ask yourself, what has repeated? What thought keeps returning? What discomfort keeps showing up? What conversation keeps echoing in your mind? What opportunity keeps appearing in different forms? What word, person, symbol, dream, memory, or desire has been circling your attention? Patterns matter, not because every pattern is magical, but because repetition is one of the ways the deeper mind breaks through avoidance. If the same ache keeps returning, it may be pointing to an ignored truth. If the same longing keeps returning, it may be pointing to an unlived life. If the same fear keeps returning, it may be guarding the exact doorway you need to walk through. Choose 3 signs from the last 30 days and write them down. Do not overinterpret them. Just notice them. Awareness alone begins to change the field. The third step is to take one small action that proves you believe in the new life. Not a giant action, not a reckless action. One small action. Send the message, open the document, make the appointment, walk for 20 minutes, clean the room where your future work will begin. Say no once, tell the truth once. Spend 1 hour learning the skill your future self will need. Remove one distraction from your morning. Apply for the thing. Start the page, make the call. The action must be small enough to complete, but meaningful enough to interrupt the old identity. This is where people underestimate power. They wait for confidence before they act, but confidence often comes after evidence, and evidence is created through behavior. When you take one action that belongs to your future self, you give your nervous system a new reference point. You are no longer only imagining change. You are participating in it. The fourth step is to stop feeding one habit that keeps you attached to the old timeline. Just one. Do not try to destroy every weakness at once. Choose one pattern that keeps pulling your energy backward. It may be checking on someone who keeps reopening a wound. It may be starting each morning with panic and noise. It may be replaying old conversations. It may be drinking, eating, spending, scrolling, pleasing, hiding, or complaining in a way that helps you avoid the real decision. The habit is not the enemy. The habit is a messenger. It shows you where you have been looking for relief instead of freedom. When you stop feeding one old pattern, even for a short time, you create silence. And in that silence, the future signal becomes easier to hear. You do not need perfect discipline. You need one clean interruption. One moment where you say, this is how the old timeline kept me available to the same pain, and today I do not participate. That single refusal matters. The fifth step is to ask one question every morning. How would I act today if I had already begun being pulled out of this crisis? Not after the crisis is fully over. Not after all the money comes. Not after every person understands. Not after fear disappears. Today. How would you walk into the day if you believed the future had already started reaching back for you? Maybe you would speak with less desperation. Maybe you would stop begging closed doors to open. Maybe you would care for your body as if you still needed it for a meaningful future. Maybe you would make a decision from dignity instead of panic. Maybe you would stop using the past as proof that nothing can change. This question is powerful because it moves you from waiting to embodiment. You stop asking, when will my life change? You begin asking, what part of the changed life can I live now? That is how alignment works. You do not become the future self by thinking about the future all day. You become the future self by choosing one present action that matches that reality. A new timeline does not need you to be perfect. It needs you to become consistent enough for your inner world to trust you again. Every small aligned action sends a signal to your mind, to your body, to your environment, to your future. I am not the same person who kept choosing the same prison. I may still be afraid, but I am moving. I may still be healing, but I am listening. I may not see the entire road, but I can take the step that is mine today. That is where the shift begins. Not in fantasy, not in escape, not in waiting for the universe to do everything for you. It begins when you send a clear answer back to the future that has been calling you. I heard the signal. I am ready to respond. And today, I will prove it with one honest step. The strongest signal may be the one you almost ignored. The fact that something inside you is still alive. After everything you have carried, after every disappointment, after every season where you had to be stronger than you felt, after every closed door, every quiet loss, every private breakdown, something in you still has not agreed to disappear. That matters. You may not feel powerful right now. You may not feel clear. You may not feel ready. But there is still a part of you that listens when the future is mentioned. There is still a part of you that reacts when you hear the words new life. There is still a part of you that becomes quiet when someone speaks about purpose, alignment, healing, and becoming someone more true. That part of you is not foolish. It is not naive. It is not childish hope. It may be the most honest part of you, because the old life may have taught you to lower your expectations. The old pain may have trained you to expect less. The old disappointments may have convinced you that wanting more is dangerous. But even after all of that, something inside you still senses that your story is not complete. That sense is a signal, not a guarantee that life will become easy, not a promise that every wound will vanish overnight, not proof that the universe will arrange everything without your courage, but a signal that the deepest part of you is not fully identified with the crisis. And that is where freedom begins. A crisis becomes dangerous when you start calling it your identity. You are not just someone who lost. You are not just someone who was betrayed. You are not just someone who failed. You are not just someone who waited too long. You are not just someone who missed the perfect moment. You are a person standing inside a difficult chapter, not a person defined by that chapter forever. There is a difference. When you confuse the crisis with yourself, you give it authority over your future. You begin to speak from it, you choose from it, you expect from it, you protect it without realizing it. You allow one season of pain to become the lens through which every possible tomorrow must pass. But when you begin to see the crisis as a passage, not a permanent name, something loosens. You may still hurt. You may still grieve. You may still not know the next step. But the pain is no longer the center of your identity. It becomes information. It becomes pressure. It becomes a doorway. It becomes the place where the old self starts losing control. That is why the feeling of not belonging to your old life should not be dismissed too quickly. You may think it means something is wrong with you, but maybe something is finally becoming right. Maybe you no longer belong to the habits that kept you small. Maybe you no longer belong to the relationships that required you to abandon your own truth. Maybe you no longer belong to the routines that made you look stable while your spirit was shrinking. Maybe you no longer belong to the version of success that cost you your peace. Maybe the discomfort is not proof that you are lost. Maybe it is proof that another version of you has already begun forming. This new version may not be visible yet. It may not have a clear name. It may not have a perfect plan. It may not know exactly where to go, but it is there. You feel it when you cannot keep pretending. You feel it when silence becomes more honest than old conversations. You feel it when the things that used to impress you no longer move you. You feel it when your body refuses to carry the same stress in the same way. You feel it when a small truth inside you becomes louder than the life you built around avoiding it. That is the beginning of the shift. Not dramatic, not always beautiful, not always comfortable, but real. The new reality does not always arrive by changing everything around you first. Sometimes it begins when you stop agreeing with the old story inside you. The story that says it is too late. The story that says you are too damaged. The story that says you missed your chance. The story that says your past has more power than your future. The story that says the crisis is the end. The moment you stop believing that story completely, a different timeline becomes possible. Not because fantasy replaces action, but because identity changes before reality changes. A person who believes life is over will move differently than a person who believes life is calling them forward. A person who believes pain is the final truth will choose differently than a person who believes pain is a passage. A person who believes the future is closed will notice different things than a person who believes one honest step can still open a door. This is why the signal matters. It gives you one reason to move, one reason to listen, one reason to stay awake, one reason to stop giving the old life full control over your imagination. You do not need to know the entire future today. You only need to know that the part of you still reaching for meaning is not dead. Protect that part. Feed it with truth. Give it one action. Give it one quiet morning. Give it one honest decision. Give it one boundary. Give it one step away from what keeps breaking you. That is how you answer the signal. Not with perfection, with participation. Your future self is not asking you to become fearless. It is asking you to stop letting fear be the only voice you obey. It is not asking you to erase your past. It is asking you to stop using the past as a prison. It is not asking you to rebuild everything overnight. It is asking you to send one clear message through your choices. I am still here. I am still listening. I am willing to become more than this crisis. And maybe that is enough for today. Because sometimes the greatest turning point does not feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like a quiet refusal to give up on yourself. Maybe your future self is not waiting for you at the end of the road. Maybe it is already reaching back, sending one quiet signal through the noise, telling you, do not stop here. This is not where your story ends.